Hey, what's going on, Guardians? My name is The Black Link, and today is Thursday, August 11th, 2022. And you know what that means. It's time for another issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. And man, am I excited for this one. We've got some Sandbox changes to talk about, including weapon and archetype buffs and nerfs, as well as some exotic tuning that's going to have some of you cheering and quite a few of you, well, we'll say not cheering. That's right, this week's TWAB is all about future Sandbox changes, and it could not have a better messenger. One of the reasons I'm so excited for this week's TWAB is because we're getting to hear from an old friend of ours. The one, the only Mercules, who recently went to go work for Bungie, is actually going to be the one telling us about the Sandbox changes that we're going to be experiencing next season. Let's go ahead and dive on in. For those who don't know, Mercules, of course, is a legendary figure within the Destiny community. One of the primary purveyors of the Massive Breakdown podcast, he has been a staple of the Destiny community's more weapon and sandbox focused voices for a long time, basically since the original Destiny first came out. He recently got a job at Bungie as a part of their associate designers on the Sandbox team, and we're hearing from him this week on what's going to be changing in Season 18 and forward. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive on into it. Now, in a section titled Weapons and Things, we get a quick, too long didn't read version rundown of what we're going to be learning about in this week's swap. And so in short, they've buffed some underutilized weapon archetypes, including scout rifles and heavy grenade launchers in PvE, high-impact auto rifles, and lightweight bows. They've also buffed multiple perks, fixed some bugged perks, and updated some perk descriptions to be more accurate. They've also buffed multiple exotic weapons and added intrinsic anti-champion functionality to some. Hallelujah! They've reworked a couple of exotic weapons whose functionality was causing issues, and they've updated the perk pools for Dares of Eternity weapons and given them a new origin trait. Exciting stuff contained in this week's TWAB. And so now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how exactly these weapons are going to be changing. First up, for some global changes, they fixed an issue introduced in the 30th anniversary update that caused too much heavy ammo to drop when running double special weapons. I actually noticed that if you were running with like double shotguns or double sniper rifles, you would get a lot of purple drops. Also, several weapon stats were previously hidden, which made fully evaluating weapons difficult. This includes airborne effectiveness, recoil direction, zoom, and aim assist. They'll now all have visible stats in weapon inspection screens starting next season. Then, we've got the changes to weapon archetypes. First up, scout rifles are getting some love in PvE. They've increased the damage of all scout rifles versus minor enemies, which are red bar enemies, in PvE by 10%. This change is in addition to the baseline damage buff given in the Solstice balance patch. Then, we've got changes to high impact, that's 360 RPM auto rifles. They've increased the base stability stat of all non-sunset high-impact auto rifles by about 6 to 12 points, depending on the weapon. Numerically, this may seem like a small change, but it noticeably changes the feel of these weapons. Then, we've got changes for lightweight bows. They've reduced the base draw time by 5%, from about 612 milliseconds to 580 milliseconds, and they've increased the perfect draw window, which is how long you can hold the drawn bow before you begin to lose accuracy and damage, and your total stability will modify this window of opportunity. But they've bumped up that perfect draw window from about 0.30 to 0.50 seconds on the low end, and from 0.55 to 0.80 seconds on the high end. Next, we've got hand cannon changes. Basically only one. They fixed Dire Promise's zoom stat. It got changed to 13 inadvertently, and it's now 14 again. After that, we've got changes to glaives. Their interaction with some exotic armor pieces can be a bit confusing, so they've explicitly made some changes to align better with their stated goals. Glaive melee attacks can now activate the exotic armor perks on the ACD over 0 feedback fence, Karnstein armlets, and necrotic grip. Then we've got breach grenade launcher changes. Concussion grenades can no longer roll in the magazine slot. Blinding grenades are going to be a better option in the same slot that serves the exact same purpose. After that, heavy grenade launchers, which have needed a buff in PvE for a long time. And so, Bungie has increased their damage versus majors and above by about 10%, excluding Parasite, of course, which doesn't need to deal any more damage. So there we go. That's the weapon archetype changes that we've got coming soon. After that, we've got some changes to weapon pools and weapon perks. First up, they've updated the perk pool for Dares of Eternity weapons and added a new origin trait. Additionally, they've addressed an issue where playlist weapons like Crucible, Gambit, and Strike weapons weren't fully randomizing individual perk column perk counts correctly based on the number of resets. For those of you who don't know, say we're talking you've run a bunch of strikes, you've reset your Vanguard reputation a bunch of times. Well, if you pay attention to some of your Vanguard weapon drops while you're playing through the Strike playlist, resetting your rank with the Vanguard multiple times should get you weapons that have multiple perk pools. It'll work the same for Gambit and Crucible. That hasn't been working completely correctly as it is, and that's the fix that they're talking about here. Alright, let's move into the perks. First up, Gambit and Iron Banner origin traits were too specific and generally useful, so they've both been redesigned. For the Invader Tracker Gambit origin trait, they've renamed it Gun and Run, and redesigned functionality to give a sprint speed increase on multi-kills. Then, for Iron Banner's Skulking Wolf, it's been redesigned to activate on kills while at low health, so it works in all of PvP now, rather than just Iron Banner. I'm okay with that change. Next up is a change for Ambitious Assassin. They've increased the magazine overflow from 10% to 20% per kill on primary weapons only. Special and heavy weapons will stay at 10%. And they've increased the overflow cap from 50% to 150%. That is a massive, massive increase for the benefits of Ambitious Assassin. Happy to see it. After that, Wellspring, which had an internal cooldown to prevent it from being activated too frequently, Bungie feels that's no longer necessary. And so, that cooldown has been removed, allowing for rocket launchers and grenade launchers to return more ability energy when defeating groups with a single shot. Happy to hear about it. Next up is Perpetual Motion, which was triggering frequently enough to be annoying, so they've disabled the audio-visual feedback on perk activation. After that, we've got Lead from Gold, which wasn't respecting the functionality of splitting the special ammo picked up when two special weapons were equipped. This is what I was talking about earlier. It's why Lead from Gold has become basically a tier 1 PvE perk. So, it now gives the correct amount of ammo to each weapon when two special weapons are equipped. It probably means less special ammo for you. After that, concussion grenades can no longer roll on breach grenade launchers, as we talked about before, and Vice Stinger is seeing a change. It was intended to grant ammo on weapons that support it and charge and draw time on bows only. This was inadvertently applying to linear fusion rifles as well, making it too strong of an origin trait for them. So, it's going to be seeing a bit of a change. They fixed a bug where it was applying a charge time reduction to linear fusion rifles. It will correctly only refill the magazine from reserves when it triggers on these weapons. And finally for perks, Zen Moment. It's had its description updated to say what it actually does. Of course, with Zen Moment, it states that causing damage with this weapon increases its stability. It actually works a little bit differently than that. With Zen Moment, when you activate it, it kind of fully stabilizes the dot sight on certain weapons, which is mostly a visual assist, rather than being a strict stability buff. And so I'd imagine the description is going to change to something like that. Alright, now that we're done with all that, let's move on to the final topic here. Exotic changes. We've got some buffs. We've got some nerfs. Let's go ahead and dive on into it. First up, Bungie has added anti-champion functionality to several weapons, with the goal of giving more options for each champion type. Split across weapon slot and ammo type, they expect to do this from time to time in the future as well. Starting with Le Monarch. They've added intrinsic overload to the poison arrows. Good change. Thunderlord has also got intrinsic overload. Next up is Malfeasance. They've added intrinsic unstoppable to the explosions and added plus 25 to the base airborne effectiveness stat, 28 up to 53, to match other precision hand cannons intrinsic bonus. Good stuff all around. Next up, Wishender. This bow has gotten intrinsic anti-barrier. They've also increased the number of hits versus most targets from 2 to 3. More hits against vehicles, still 2 against players. They've increased the damage versus champions, majors, and mini-bosses by 10%. And finally, the draw time has decreased from 828 milliseconds to 820 milliseconds, so you get to pull that thing a little bit faster. After that, we've got Tiku's Divination, which is already getting a free small buff from the global lightweight bow changes. And so it's had its draw time decreased from 612 to 580. After that, Legend of Acreus. There's a shotgun you probably haven't used in a while. This one's fallen very far behind other heavy short-range weapons and definitely warrants a buff. The Catalyst now grants the Trench Barrel perk in addition to its other effects. That's definitely going to be helpful for Legend of Acreus, but I almost kind of wish they would have done something like Grave Robber or Swashbuckler on it. Either way, happy to be seeing some love to Destiny 2's original big heavy exotic. Alright, after that we got some changes to some of the legendary weapons that are paired with exotics, starting with Callus Mini Tool. They've increased the airborne effectiveness from 23 to 28 to match the Mida Mini Tool. And for the Mida Mini Tool, they've increased the zoom from 13 to 14 to match the Callus Mini Tool. After that we've got Drawn. They've increased its airborne effectiveness from 21 to 23 to match the standard version. And then we get an update for the exotic Sweet Business, in which they've increased the airborne effectiveness from 27 to 32. Now, after that, we've got Fighting Lion, which is now receiving an intended buff from earlier in this season, bumping the previous damage increase it got up from 5% to 8%. And they've increased the grace time for the instant reload effect of Thin the Herd from 5 seconds to 6 seconds. Alright, and with that out of the way, now we've got the exotics that are seeing reworks, and this is where we're going to be seeing some really interesting stuff. Starting off with a big slapdown to my personal baby boy, Lord of Wolves. Lord of Wolves has long been a thorn in the side of PvP players, especially when paired with certain exotic armor pieces, Ophidians. We have changed the amount of ammo it starts with and reduced the damage dealt to players. This is part one of a larger rework aimed at making it a more viable PvE exotic without increasing its effectiveness in PvP. And so, Bungie has decreased the starting ammo in PvP from 15 down to 10. This is unchanged in PvE. They've reduced the burst size, which is the shots fired per trigger pull, from 10 to 5 shots when Release the Wolves is active. Ooh, cutting that number of shots down in half is almost kind of like cutting the damage and range in half for this weapon as well. That's going to be painful to deal with for Lord of Wolves users. Next up, they've reduced the burst delay, which is the time between bursts, by 60% when Release the Wolves is active. Which I guess means you're going to be able to fire it faster. You're going to be able to put those bursts out faster. I guess that's kind of a balancing effect there. Additionally, they've decreased Lord of Wolves' base damage by 20%. Now deals 35 damage per shot in PvP, 44 with Release the Wolves active. Ooh, that's a big hit. And they've increased its damage in PvE by 20% to compensate. So it's swiping that PvP damage, putting it right on PvE. I'll take it. Lord of Wolves has always been a rather interesting exotic. I always felt like it should have been stronger in PvE though, so I'm happy to see those changes there. Next up, for another headache weapon, Dead Man's Tale. The Cranial Spike perk was causing issues with unintended damage scalers against players and generally felt unpredictable both to use and to fight against. It also wasn't quite landing the hip-firing cowboy rifle fantasy as strongly as we wanted it to. So, we reworked it to lean more into fast-firing hipfire. And so, they've changed Cranial Spike's effects to do this. Cranial Spike no longer buffs damage versus players. Instead, it grants increased reload, aim assist, and range per stack. It still grants additional damage versus PvE combatants, however. But upon reaching max stats of Cranial Spike, the Catalyst will now increase hipfire RPM by 50, i.e. it will fire at 180 RPM, but will deal reduced damage per bullet. So it's going to fire faster, but you're going to take a 20% damage decrease. Ooh, that's kind of a trade-off. We'll see if that actually tones this bad boy down in PvP though. After that, we've got changes to the raid exotic Collective Obligation. We're aiming to make the exotic perk effects easier to activate and more effective in PvE. And so, they've increased Void Leech timer to 15 seconds in PvE activities. In PvP, this is going to remain at 10 seconds. And they've removed the cooldown. That's an interesting change. Additionally, they've added a 20% damage bonus against PvE combatants only while Void Leech is active. It now also takes less hits to fully charge Void Leech. After that, Void Leech is also instantly charged when your character is affected by Void debuffs. Does not work if hitting yourself with your own suppressor grenades though. And they fixed a bug where Umbral Sustenance was activating with non-void overshields. Interesting changes for the Collective Obligation there. We'll have to see if that makes it an easier, better weapon to use. Alright, after that, we've got changes to exotic armor. In update 6.2.0.1, Bungie's going to be reducing the effectiveness of damage resistance used by Omni and Whisper of Chains in PvP. PvE damage resistance is going to be unchanged. At Tier 1, 10% is going to go down to 2.5%. At Tier 2, 15% to 5%. At Tier 3, 20% to 7.5%. And at Tier 4, 25% down to 10%. That is a major nerf for the Omni. You hunters are taking a massive nerf hit with this one. Omni has been one of the more oppressive hunter options for PvP for a while now, and this damage reduction hit is going to be massive. It's going to be interesting to see how that changes up the game starting next season. But beyond that, there we go. That's most of the exotic changes. The last thing we've got to talk about here is a list of things Bungie's looking at addressing in the future, being Season 18's mid-season patch or Season 19. Here's what they're looking at changing. Reducing shotgun spread randomness, reducing bow swapping effectiveness, that's going to be very interesting in PvP, increasing trace rifle ease of use, introducing the full auto setting, finally, reducing the ability of snipers to shoot through flinch in PvP, and examining other small targeted balance changes to certain PvP outliers. This will include pulse rifles with out-of-band effectiveness, high-impact scout rifles ease of use, and precision fusion rifle ease of use. Beyond that, they're also going to be looking at allowing glaive interactions with some exotic armors that buff melees, fixing glaive hit detection, reworking some enhanced perks, and folding spec mods into the base perks. Interesting stuff all around. But there we go, Guardians. That's pretty much it for the biggest bits of news contained in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly Blog, This Week at Bungie. Great to see our boy Mercules putting out some information, and I'm really happy to hear about a lot of those weapon, perk, and exotic changes that we're going to be getting access to real soon. But that's the news, and those are my thoughts, Guardians. Be sure to leave me yours down in the comment section below. How do you feel about that Omni nerf for you hunter mains out there? Do you have another exotic that you think you're going to be jumping over to? Be sure to let me know. But if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all latest stuff we're putting out. I'm out for now. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.